had done one on my Clay family before, but I wanted to do this one on Don Redman, who was a well-known jazz artist and orchestra leader back in the 1930s. So we today are going to go on a journey on me finding Don. You're going to have an opportunity to listen to some of Don's music. And then really the greatest part of this is we're going to go through a pictorial at the very end of the presentation where I was able to link up with real living ancestors of Don, or descendants of Don, because that was really the challenge that I was trying to find for probably the past 12 years. So we're going to go through that, and anytime that you may have a question, feel free to ask a question that you might have. And then the other thing I wanted to say, feel free after the presentation to browse some of the artifacts that I have here that I brought on Don, and some of them I'll go into a little more description as I go through the presentation. So you may ask, who was Donald Matthew Redman? He was known as the Little Giant of Jazz, and one of the reasons that he had that title was that he was a big man during that period, the Harlem Renaissance period, in terms of his writing, his composition, and his orchestra work, but he was very small in stature. So he was a little man, but in stature, but he was a big man in jazz. How did I find Don's descendants is really what we're going to be talking about today. 1968, I said, would be my starting point. And that is when, how we all get together at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, and we talk about our ancestors, which I think is really important when we're especially having time with our family, with our children. I learned about Don when I was about 10 years old. And Don, even though he was small in stature, he would come back and he would visit my grandparents and his cousins back in Cumberland, Maryland, and back in Piedmont, West Virginia. So I always heard those stories about Don. Now you have to remember that some of those stories were embellished, because he was in New York and had an orchestra. So when he came to town, he was dressed up with a nice Cadillac and had all these stories. So many of them were probably embellished just a little bit. My mother was born in the 30s, so many of those stories that she was passing along to me were secondhand. So let's fast forward from 1968 to January 2002. Well, for those of you, probably only one of you in this room knows my mother. My mother we call Susie, and Susie is a pretty feisty woman. And she heard in January 2002 that the National Park Service was going to honor Don Redman. Well, there was a gentleman in our town named Reverend Coleman, and Reverend Coleman had decided that he would represent the Redman family at this event. And Susie wasn't going to have any part of it. She said, oh, no. Don is my kin. I know we're not having it. So she called me and she said, we need to get in touch with these people. Now, calls me. She doesn't call the other people. She calls me. You get on that phone and call the Park Service, and you tell them that we're coming. Okay, so I called the Park Service, and say, my mother said, because this meant, you're going to be on the front page, and you'll see this over here, and you'll see that a little later, too. You're going to be on the front page of the newspaper. You're going to be a VIP, because it was a big deal. So I called them. Now, I hadn't really heard anything about Don since I was a kid, so I said, okay, but I know it is. So we did that. My mother and we attended this, it was at Storer College, and it was wonderful. So we went there, and then that same year, my husband and I, one of the things that we wanted to do in our community, we lived in Cumberland, Maryland, we wanted to open up a museum. And we were working with a couple of museums throughout the state of Maryland. And one of the things that they suggested is that we use some local history. And I thought, well, we've already worked on Don's history, so let's continue to do it. So that was the first exhibit, and that's when I really started to research his ancestor. Well, so then we fast forward 7 more years. We did the museum, kind of did our little information in terms of updating the genealogy, but really Don was kind of under the radar until about 2009. And again, my mother calls me on the phone and says, hey, I read in the newspaper that they're going to be inducting Don in the West Virginia Hall of Fame for music. And that Dr. Coleman, he thinks he's going to go down there and claim Don. No, he's not. You get on the phone and you call down there and you tell him, he got kinfolk up here. Yeah. So, okay, so I call down there. Okay, we're done. So, and that was a really great one. And that one is here, where Don was actually inducted into the West Virginia in 2009 Hall of Fame, along with some other ones there. And so we have the program for that you can look at too. So we actually got, he actually was inducted into the Hall of Fame. But again, at this same time, I started wondering, you know, the two of us, we know that he has other relatives, but it just seems like the two of us are the only two going. Maybe Don is saying, I can count on you to go and get it, but I also felt as though other Redman kinfolk should be involved in this too, not just us. So then I started thinking, and I never thought about this before, did Don have any children? Yeah. And I never thought, so I was like, well, Mom, did Don have any kids? No, they didn't have no kids. Well, are we sure that he didn't have any children? So I started looking, still couldn't find anything, and then I started to talk. Many of you know Jane Ailes. Okay, Jane Ailes has done some research. She's worked with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, and I think she's been to a couple of the Central Virginia meetings. I asked Jane, because she was working with Dr. Gates, and she said, you know, he might have a daughter. I think I'm looking, and I think that he might have a daughter. Well, then I got really excited because I wanted this daughter, if I could find her, or granddaughter, to be able to go with us to this induction. And so Jane was helping me, and we were doing work, and long story short, we couldn't find them until months later. We couldn't find them until after we had attended the inductee services. So on March the 4th, and this is one of the reasons why I keep all of my emails. I mean, I must have, well, Shelley sends me about 5,000 a day or so. but of the ones that I have all the Shelleys. It times, dates, everything. So on March the 4th, 2010, 3 years ago, Ed McDonald from the Mineral County Historical Society sent me an email from a gentleman from South Carolina inquiring about his great-grandfather, Don Redman. And that really moved me into a different position in terms of because this was actually, and he didn't know anything. Now, the reason that Curtis, his name is Curtis Rucker Jr., he contacted Mineral County, which is in West Virginia, the same place that Piedmont is located in my home county. He had read an article in the newspaper about Don Redman. This was his great-grandfather, and no one in his family had ever shared this story about his great-grandfather. Now, we probably can't even imagine that, but we all know that we have different dynamics in our family. Maybe something happened, and, because we're talking, 50, 60 years. But I don't know, and he didn't know, but all he knew was that he read and he had heard that Don Redman was his relative. So I get this email and I said, well, I'll contact Mr. Rucker. And knowing me, I just let people come and stay with me. My husband says sometimes an axe murderer, somebody's going to be in our house. And so, but I kind of filled them out, talked to them on the phone. I don't think let anybody go. So I talked to Curtis, called him up, sent him an email. And we had, several conversations between March and June about his great-great-grandfather, Don Redman, and it was very moving and very stirring for him because he said, I'd never heard this. I had no idea they were having a heritage festival for him. And thank you for, for holding up the torch for us. Anyway, I invited Curtis to come to the 9th annual to stay with us, and so that he would be able to go to the festival with us, and on behalf of the Redman family and of his great-grandfather, he would be able to do a presentation. So that's kind of the sum of looking for Don and finding Don, and that will tie us with the pictures that I'm going to share with you a little later. But I just wanted to give you a little genealogy and some background information on Don as a jazz artist, and he really was a child prodigy. He was born July 29, 1900 in Piedmont, West Virginia. And I'm always saying, when people ask me where I'm from, I said, well, you don't really know where it is. It's a little teeny town called Piedmont, West Virginia. And inevitably, someone will say, I've heard of Piedmont, West Virginia before. It just amazes me because a lot of good people came out of Piedmont. So anyway, he was born in Piedmont. He died November 30th, you can see, in 1964 from complications from a stroke. His parents were, I don't think I have a pointer here, which I did, but his parents were Daniel and Henrietta Walker Redman. Grandparents, and this is where I tie in, was Solomon and Ann Redman. Solomon was my great-great-grandfather, and he would have been Don's great-great-grandfather too, so that's our linkage there. He was born to Solomon and Ann Redman. Solomon had 2 wives, and I'm connected on the line that has the other wife, but I'm just taking you through his genealogy here. So then we find that, and I didn't know this, Grace and Leota Redman and Lewis and Webster Redman both lived in Cumberland, Maryland, right from my husband's hometown, right under my nose, and I had no idea who these people were. Now, my husband knew who they were because he was from, the community, but I didn't. But really the linchpin in finding all of this was Yvonne Redman Whitehurst. That was Don's only child, his only daughter. So once I found her through Curtis, and I could link up with everyone else. So you can see the great-great-grandchildren. Curtis Rucker is there as well as his cousin, so that's where the connection is. Now, my connection to him, again, is through Solomon Redman, and Solomon had Dan Redman and Mabel Redman Gator. Mabel Redman was my grandmother, so they were siblings. And there's a picture of my grandmother, Mabel Gator, and of course, and that's my grandfather, Solomon Gator. So I always say, it's in a lot of families, the naming patterns are very similar, and I had a lot of Solomons, and she probably got it confused too, because she had a Solomon. Oh, and there's Shirley Solomon. Yes, there's Shirley Solomon. We got more Solomons than we know what to do with. Solomon was my grandfather. Solomon was the name of her father, and Solomon was also her brother's name. So we had a lot of Solomons in the family. Now let me tell you a little bit about the Don. His mother was Henrietta. She was a singer, so he came from a musical family. He was a child prodigy. He started performing at age 3, and by the time he was 12, he was proficient in all of the wind instruments. From 1916 to 1920, he was enrolled at Historic Store College in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and that's actually where they also have the Heritage, and they have it every year. They'll be having the concert again this year. And he is considered the first jazz composer arranger in history. And so this was kind of like a new entree into jazz writing, and so he started writing for the big bands. And you can't see that very well, but that's Don, his father, Daniel Redman. And then his mother, I always like to, and probably most of you will say this too, we think that things are by accident, but there really aren't. It's for something to happen in the future. Howard School in Piedmont, West Virginia, they always would have an alumni reunion, and my father attended Howard School, and they did a history from 1877 to 1955. And this is where this picture comes from. Where before my father passed away, I was always nagging and bothering my father for something, You know how kids do. My kids nag me and bother me for things too. But this was his history book, or his school book. And I said, Daddy, can I just borrow that book and take it down to Charlottesville? No, girl, get away from me. You'll lose it. Da, 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 da. He knew I wasn't going to lose it. So he said, okay, finally gave in. He said, you can take it with you. And he said, but make sure you bring it back. So I said, okay. So I brought it here, and I had the yearbook at the same time that Curtis came to visit, not knowing that Henrietta Walker was Curtis's ancestor. So while he was visiting with me, we were going through the book, and he said, oh my goodness, he said, this is my great-great-grandmother? And I said, yes, this is her. And then when I fast forward a little later, you'll see Curtis's sister, who looks very much like her great-great-grandmother. Yeah. So you wonder why did I have this book? It was for a reason. It was destined for me to have the book. And that's his birth there. He made he was, was an outstanding student at the Howard School in Piedmont, West Virginia. So Don, again, you can see here how little. He's in the 8th grade, how little he is, and that's the entire student body there at the Howard School. And Don was in the big band. You can see Don here, how little he is. And this is a grown-up high school band, and Don looks like a little kid. But he was also played shortstop, so he was a great baseball player as well. Now, most of these people, again, were either relatives or neighbors because this was in Piedmont, West Virginia. And this person here, his name is Kenneth Taylor. And the only reason that I bring that up is one of my good friends from West Virginia, her name was Shelley too, and that's her grandfather on there. So, those friendships kind of stay with you. And then Don, you always kind of marry the girl next door, somebody that, He married, and I didn't know about this, but he married Thelma Gilmore. And of course, Thelma Gilmore Redman after they married. And Thelma is right here. She's the little girl right there. So when Curtis was visiting with me, he got to see his grandmother, his great-grandmother, and his great-grandfather, just by having that yearbook. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty good. And then, of course, Don and Thelma got married. Now Thelma was Don's first wife. He married another lady, Gladys, and then that's kind of when he started getting into the big band. But he only had one child, and that was with Thelma. And of course, he's always touted as the Howard School's most famous alumnus, Donald M. Redman. I had an uncle, my mother's brother. His name was Uncle Ralph. And in some of our families, we really have trained musicians and people who were really talented. Well, my Uncle Ralph thought he was a musician too, but most of the time he had us, we had like pans and buckets and cymbals, and I think he was kind of like a wannabe Don Redman, but we had so much fun, and my Uncle Ralph actually looked like Cousin Don there. Now, this person, he's still alive. He's in Cumberland, Maryland. I didn't know. His name was Louis Redman, and they call him Baby because he's short. Yeah. So you see where we're going here with the genetics. We didn't have a whole lot of height in this side of the family. But Baby Louis is again, it's too bad that he's in a nursing home, but when we were younger, we would go to dances. He would always ask women to dance. Now, he's married, has his own family, who were taller than him because he said this was just as always a soft place to be. When you're dancing, So he was just always a lot of fun. Now, we have good genealogy and we have some things that aren't so happy. And with Louis, because Don was his uncle. And Louis was very close to Don. He would come to Cumberland, and and he would have his band come and play at the places there, the locations there. So I am certain that he had a lot of memorabilia and pictures and stories. His wife passed away, and of course, as I said, he's in a nursing home. Now I asked his stepdaughter for some photographs. Some people won't give you stuff. Right. And so I know that I'm just hopeful that somebody in that family will be generous and just loan me the photographs, let me upload them, and we can have them for future generations. But that's Baby Louis Redman. And I won't go through all of these, but I will give you the highlights. When he graduated, he started playing with, he joined Skinner's Orchestra in Fairmont. As you can see, he also played semi-pro baseball with the Fairmont Giants. Then his career really takes off when he, in 1928, when he records with Louis Armstrong. And then from 1931 to 40, he starts his own band, the Don Redman Orchestra, and he performs regularly at Connie's Inn in Harlem, New York. Now, when I was doing the research, I thought about what that meant and what was Connie's Inn. Because we think of the the Cotton Club, and it was in that, Connie's Inn kind of competed with the Cotton Club in terms of their entertainment. But remember, during that time, it was segregated, and so they just played for all white audiences. And he was there for many years, as you can see, almost 10 years. And I'll think about the psychological struggle that you go through. Every day you have to deal with this. And Connie the person, Connie Emmerman, was the person who owned the inn, and she was a bootlegger. So, you know, you're always, the cops are coming in, and you have to pack up the band and run out, and so you're dealing with, you know, a lot of segregation, and you have this enormous talent, but it's limited. So at Connie's and at Cotton Club, really this was the only place where black performers could go and have their talent to be really, to be compensated for. So he did that for a while, and then in 1946, he was the first one to form a band to tour Europe, and his band featured Billy Taylor and Don Redman, and he stayed in Europe for almost a year until 1947. He was the first one in 1949 to do a TV series for CBS, and it was called Sugar Hill Times. And then in 1951, he began working as a musical director for the famous Pearl Bailey. Here are some of the people that he did collaborate with that you will probably recognize their name: Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Bing Crosby, Jimmy Dorsey, Eubie Blake, Duke Ellington, Fats Waller, Lena Horne, and of course Betty Boop.
I thought Betty Boop was
Betty Boop's a cartoon. She is a cartoon. Right there.
But so how was he called?
He didn't collaborate with her because she was drawing, but he did music for her cartoon. And the most famous one, song that he did was one called I Heard, and you're going to hear that at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I have his music. And again, you don't know why you show up certain places. And Don was a good friend with Count Basie, and I took this picture many years ago at the Kennedy Center. So that was one of Don's friends. Some of Don's famous songs is Gee Baby Ain't I Got It Good. And I can just hear people in my community of Piedmont singing some of these songs, and they're all on some CDs that I have. And then Shaking the African was probably one of the more livelier songs.
What is an African?
Well, it's your butt. Okay. We all have an African. You just have to shake it. You got an African too. Now, the funny thing about Betty Boop was she was, you know, a sexy cartoon. Because back then she was competing with Minnie Mouse and, you know, the lots more so sexy. But Betty Boop was really an adult cartoon, and so they tied her together. There were many musicians who wrote music for her, but Don was one of the first ones, and he actually is in a cartoon with her. With Betty Boop, again, some of those ties, she premiered or debuted on August the 9th, 1930, and our second daughter was born on August the 9th. Yeah, so that's tied to Betty Boop. And then our oldest daughter, when she was born, one of my friends, because she had real black hair, curly black hair, and they said, oh, my daughter's name is Whitney. Oh, she looks like Betty Boop. So without knowing any of that background, we're kind of tied with Betty Boop too. Here's a picture of Connie's in the outside, and now it's still standing, but it's a grocery store on the inside. Yeah. And then the inside, you could see during that time, things were very elegant. I've always wanted to live during that time if we just didn't have that little pesty other stuff going on. But it just seemed like it was very elegant. People dressed up and they went out and they danced. We need to bring that back. Shelley, take a note of that. We need to bring that back.
I got it.
And then, of course, this is Susie. And this is Benny Powell, who didn't play with Don directly, but did with some work with the orchestra. And then, if you will see in the background, you'll see the exhibit. We actually borrowed that exhibit from store, and that's where we debuted it at the museum in Cumberland. So that's the two of us there. And then that was the first exhibit at our museum. This is us attending the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame in 2009. My mother and myself. And we're really proud to do that because initially, they didn't know who was even going to be able to come, so we were happy that we were able to come on attend on his behalf. And then she gets this picture's kind of blurred, and I apologize for this. But Bill Withers, who's one of her favorite singers, he spent the whole weekend with these people. I mean, they just wined and dined us. It was great. And he was the one who, he's from West Virginia too, who presented the award to the family. And then this is Don's alma mater, Store College. And I encourage you all, if you ever go to Shepherdstown to visit the school, it's beautiful. And then they give the music festival every year. Curtis and I, this is Dawn's grandson, great-grandson, I'm sorry, and that's just the part of the exhibit space that's at Store. So we went to visit that. And then they give that's us again at the Don Redman Heritage Concert. Uh-oh, something happened there. What happened?
Just go back up and go slideshow and go back to the slide you're at.
Okay, go back up to slideshow?
Yeah, you're gonna have to take your finger and go up to your computer.
Oh, I have to go up this way.
Yeah, go up to slideshow, to the right,
Very top, very top.
way to the top, across the top. Keep going,
Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
view slideshow, and then just go back to the slide you're at. Page down, or
It
use
doesn't
your,
give me that right here. Oh, wait a minute.
yeah, or use your clicker.
Okay, let's go to the side. Let's see, I think right here.
Yeah.
Okay, does that bring me there? Let's see if we can go to the next one. See, I don't know what that's doing.
If we
Well,
bring
let's
it back
see, you
to
may
the-
just have to, no, not at the end.
then I would just leave it there.
We're gonna leave it here, and because I just have a couple more, and then.
There you are.
What I wanted to show you was some of the, that's the award, and then that's, we're going to Harper's Ferry, the museum, they have Dawn's, can you see, oh, I'm sorry, Dawn there. And then, what I've been trying to do for the past couple of years is encourage people from our community, because there are plenty of people back in Cumberland and West Virginia who are related to Dawn, that we have strangers coming and singing his praises, but we don't have a lot of family members, so I'm trying to encourage more family members to come. And then this was the awards. Now this person, Todd Bolton, I would say that he really is an expert on Don Redman. He was the person who contacted us back in 2002 and is still hosting the Don Redman Heritage. He knows a lot about Don Redman.
She a ranger at Harper's Ferry?
Yes,
The
it's a
Park
ranger
Service.
there at the Park Service. And then this is Curtis giving the award. And this was very moving. I can see Dawn, although there are different complexions, I can see Dawn's characteristics and Curtis, and it was very moving for him as well. Now this is Dawn's only daughter, and it took me almost 2 years to get this. I said, do you have any pictures of your grandmother? No, we don't have any pictures. It just amazes me that people don't, either you have the pictures and you don't want to share them, or you
Right,
don't
right.
have, but I think as many people don't want to share the pictures. I don't know
Oh,
why.
that's true.
Yeah, and so, now his mother is her daughter. And she doesn't have any pictures of her mother?
Oh.
I don't know. Okay, you can figure that one out. So I said, well, can you give me something? Can you find anything? So he said, well, I think I have my grandmother's obituary, which was even better, because then I could get more information and give me the whole thing, and it's right there. But that's Yvonne Whitehurst. And the one thing that I love about photographs is that this woman looks just like my family. She looks just like the Redman kinfolk back in West Virginia. And his mother, Curtis's mother, looks very much like Susie, my mother. So you can see the family resemblance. Like Curtis doesn't look like his mother, but his mother looks like our family. Curtis looks like his father. And then that's, would be Don Redman's grandmother, Don Redman's granddaughter, and then his great-great-granddaughter, that's another one. And I've just recently, through social media, been able to get these pictures through Facebook, because I will really pester people nicely. Did you remember that picture you said you were going to send to me 2 months later? I'm still waiting for that picture. I know you're busy, but do you think you could, you guys can wait for it, okay. So I just got this one recently, and so I don't have all of their names, because, now these two are Curtis's first cousins, so I know their names, but then these are their children, okay? And so sometimes we know that people don't have the same mothers and fathers and
Right.
surnames, so I didn't want to go there yet. I'm not comfortable with that yet.
Are they connected to Darius Rucker?
that the same thing?
Well, the Rucker's from the,
South Carolina.
he says he is. Now, I don't know about that, but Curtis says they are. Because he was, and that's some more grand kids there. And then, of course, this is me going Curtis Rucker, and they live in Johns Island, South Carolina, not too far from Charleston. And then this is another granddaughter there. And then this would be Curtis's first cousin, Don's great-great-grandson. And then that's a great-great. So I have their names scribbled, and then that's more grandkids. And all of these people I'm just meeting, and they live in Buffalo, New York. So I haven't met them physically, just on the internet. And this is Curtis's sister. And we became friends on Facebook, and I just downloaded all these pictures. I asked for permission, told them I was doing this presentation. And she said, I am so thankful that you're doing this because I've never heard any of this about my great, and so that's why we do it, is to make sure. And then, that's the end, that's when we first met Curtis, and one of my favorite places in Charlottesville is Carter's Mountain. So we went there and we took a picture. So that pretty much ends the presentation. I want to just play a little song for you, and then any questions that you might have that I can entertain for you. So I hope you've enjoyed the journey of Don Redman. This is his orchestra. And let me tell you a little bit about this. Like, some people hold back their information from you, but then there are other people who are in the community who are very generous. Well, now when I did the exhibit on Don Redman, there was a person, we put it in a newspaper, and there was an individual in a neighboring town that said, in the 1950s, someone gave me a collection. They passed down a collection. I've got a lot of stuff in there. And one of the things that I have, or a few of the things, are Don Redman CDs. Would you like to have them? And yes, I would. Mail them to me. And so he sent them to me, and he sent me all of his personal notes. He had been following Don Redman for years and years and years. And I didn't even know this person. So I'm going to just play one of the little songs here. He's got a lot of them. And the one song that I think, hopefully it'll come up here, that I want you to hear is called I Heard, because he was very playful with his songs. That is on there. Okay, it's loading. And that's the Betty Boop song. Music. This is called Why Pick on Me.
What year?
Can you hear it?
Yeah, what year?
1931.
31.
Oh, there it is. I was trying to see if we could find the other one, but I just want you to get kind of an ear.
Slide it over, maybe it's on the other
Come
side.
on here this way. Something else might come on. That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, if you select songs there.
Right there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's where it'll come, right?
Yeah.
Then you could find it.
But see, these are other songs in my eye
Click
too.
on name,
Yeah.
to the left,
Under music?
under music.
Go
click on
down.
Name, sort by
Oh,
name.
okay, let's see.
No.
There you go.
Music, Kay.
And then what was the name of it?
But see, it's not downloaded. That's why I was like yesterday when I did this. See, this is other music I have in here.
It's not going to include it.
It didn't do it. It came up by itself yesterday. I wanted you to hear I
There should be a
Heard.
sidebar. shouldn't there?
Yeah, and see, it came up on this one.
Double click and open it.
There you go.
There we go. This is the one I wanted. Now, how do I stop the other one?
You have to go back,
Just
go
click
back
on one
to
of those,
I2.
double click on one of those.
Yeah, it should stop.
This is what.
This
This is I Heard.
Oh, I thought it was chicken.
I'm gonna give you that one too. demonstration, and I might have to, I have some, can you hear it a little, I have some,
And that's still in the 30s?
this is still, all of this is in the 30s. I think I have some.
Now, you said he attended, well, that's fine, you said he attended Stower, right?
Yes,
Did he graduate?
He did.
What did he get a degree?
And he all, in music.
Good.
In music from 1916, he graduated at age 20.
Okay.
From 1916 to 1930. To 1920, he was at Stowe. He graduated, and he also went to the Boston Conservatory of Music. He lived in Detroit, and Chicago, and New York, and of course he traveled abroad with his orchestra. And if you Google him, you will see that he worked for a lot of different orchestras, and that was typical at the time.
Right.
Yeah, you know, it was very difficult to work for one. And because he was creative, he started to support his wife and his child and make money and live in a segregated society and find housing and be dressed up. Because, being in an orphan, it's a very elegant type of world. Yeah. But that's, I heard, I wanted you also to hear. And one of the things about I heard is in a lot of our communities, we always say, well, I heard that she was pregnant. Ain't nobody tell me I heard that. Or I heard she don't cook too well. But don't you tell nobody. That's where he kind of got that from.
Didn't come from me.
You didn't hear that from me, though, but I heard it. And my mother would always say, well, where'd you hear it from? It don't matter who I heard it from. I just heard it. But I think it's on this one. Let's see. And if you will Google Betty Boop, see if I saw it up here. Oh, here it is. Now, see, on this one, his music is he's really talking, and Betty Boop is talking too. If you've seen that. But now, Shaking the African, Jane, this is for you. And you see how it starts out a little slow.
Can you turn it up a little?
You know what? I probably have to put my, hold on a second, so that you can really hear them.
I'll close the door if I need to.
Yeah, close the door in church. Yeah. You can see that here the.
I love the 30s jazz.
Oh, me too.
And the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
So you can hear the jazz and the horns. You got your African on? But see that how he speaks more than he sings.
Is this him doing the voice?
Yes,
Yes.
that's his voice.
Man, new movement, brother. What an improvement. Gang goes loco, man. Every time they shaking their ass.
So Curtis now can hear his great grandfather's
Absolutely.
voice. That's what's interesting.
That's
When did you start gathering this information? How long did it take you to get those dates?
Okay, I'll take some questions now, but I just kind of wanted you guys to get a sense.
Love it.
And then I should go off.
Because you had all those dates down, it's like, where did you get the information?
I actually started in 2002 of collecting the information when we started doing our museum collection piece, because I knew if I was putting together an exhibit, I was going to have to do some research on Don. And there was a local minister, his name was Reverend Lester Clifford, in our community, who was Don's maybe 15 years difference in their age, so he knew Don when he was a young boy, and he knew the history of the community. So that's when we started interviewing him, and I started taking all these notes, and then putting information in the local paper about collecting information about him. So the process really started in 2002. And then whenever people would invite us to go, because my mother was like, "You're doing this," she just shows up.
Did you complete like in 2012 or?
I'm still, this just, with the recent pictures, we're talking like last week.
I'm talking about the dates that you had, like about Redmond,
Mm-hmm.
all of that information.
All of his jazz history.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that was already done at Store College.
Okay.
Yeah, they had already, because he is a very famous alum of Store College and also of Howard School. So a lot of this information, like for example, in the yearbook, I think it's towards the middle, they have a whole page. I love these yearbooks. See, this one was his mother, Henrietta Walker. And then in here, they have whole information. I'm not sure if I can find it right now. My dad, but there it is. See, that's his whole information.
Oh,
And the yearbook, yeah. And so between Howard School, private researchers, and then Store College, I was able to put everything together. And that's what I was saying earlier. It's easy sometimes to get the bits and pieces of the information, the narrative. What's difficult and what I like the most are the people. I like the flesh and blood. When I'm looking for someone, I want to see, do you look like me? Do you act like, what is your connection to West Virginia? We share these people in common. And so that's really what I like to find. That's what challenges me the most in genealogy. I want to see what you look like. Yeah. I want it to be up close and personal. And so, this is it's my family there. How'd they get up there? All of these people are Gators and Redmonds. And so we'll be having a reunion pretty soon. This is my mom, that's Susie, this is her house in West Virginia. And all of these people would be related to Don Redman. Yeah, so.
I think I found something on YouTube last night that claimed to be him directing his orchestra. Have you seen that?
Oh, claimed to be him, or was it?
It said it was him.
It was probably him.
It was a big fancy lighted.
Oh, yeah, that's him. Yeah, that's him. That's him. And also, there is another artist that's out, and his name, he's very famous, so if you Google him, and he's contemporary, his name is Joshua Redman. And he's kind of like the Kenny G, of music now. And he's very gifted. I contacted him, and I said, well, actually, his assistant. And I said, I think that you're related to us. He said, no, he didn't know his family or anything like that. Well, there was a writer back in the 1970s that was a jazz writer, and he wrote an extensive article in this reputable music paper. And he's still alive, and I contacted him. And one of the things that he said was that Joshua Redman's father's name was Dewey Redman. And Dewey Redman said that he was from Piedmont, West Virginia. Now, you can't make that kind of stuff up. I mean, he could say I'm from Washington, D.C., I'd probably X it out. But Piedmont? So I said, there has to be a connection. So I contacted Joshua, and I said, I think you're my kinfolk. And and if you look at his picture, he looks very much like Don's daughter. He looks like a Redman. So I think that he is, so I claim him. When I spoke to this writer later on, I said, well, he acts like he don't want to be part of our family, which is okay. He's a celebrity. But he said, I think, Leontyne, the reason may be because he did not have a good relationship with his father, Dewey Redman, and Dewey was a musician too. And so maybe he just doesn't want to open up that can of worms. Some things you just have to let it go. And sometimes we do have to let things go. But I would say that Joshua Redman is probably related to us on a cousin level. Yeah, and he said his father, Dewey Redman, who died, I think like in, not too long ago, maybe like 7 years ago or something like that. They collaborated, did some work together, but they had a strained relationship for many, many years. His mother raised him in California. He graduated from Harvard. I think Joshua Redman went there to be, like an anthropologist or something, and fell in love with jazz. Well, sometimes things are genetic. They just are. So I don't think that that's by accident. So I'm claiming Joshua and Dewey, and there are a lot of people out there researching them too. Yeah.
I'm kind of interested. You said he was short.
Yeah,
statue. Have you been able to find any medical history as to why he was short or the family? 1931, which meant he probably was born with a midwife, not in a hospital.
That's a good question. I haven't done any research, but I would just say that it was probably just genetic.
Genetic, right.
Because many of the men on that Redman mine, even to this day,
Are short.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking
They're
Skip Gates is
just-
Redman line. They're all
Yeah.
under
short.
5'5", basically.
Yeah,
they're short.
They're Dr. Skip Gates. I'm saying he's in
Yeah.
the
because
Redman
he
line
didn't
and
have
he's
any
little.
kind of, he was just short.
Just short.
Like my grandfather
Yeah.
on my play side.
Little
he
people.
He was short. They were just short. So they were just short.
I'm just curious
Yeah.
about short people because I'm short.
Yeah. But you're right. Yeah, he was short, but he had
Good
this
thing some
huge
small back.
personality.
There you
go.
Yeah, that's right. He had a huge personality because everyone talked about Don Redman. I mean, when we did our interviews, the people would just, well, you can see him here. Here's a little picture of him there.
Oh.
Yeah, he was a classy man. Just a studied man. I would just kind of consider him a Renaissance man, but everyone who spoke about him said he had a lot of class, he had a lot of style. So even though he was short in stature, his personality was big. See, I think I'm tall, and my husband says, I always describe myself as tall.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, and I think I said, thank you.
She's
No. He's tall.
Now, am I still tall?
Yeah,
You
you're
say
tall.
I'm still tall. I'm tall.
Wait, let hubby come up there and stand next to you.
He compares, I'm talking about the average size woman. I'm tall. Don't you guys think so?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've had this argument for so many years.
She wears heels all the time, so that's it.
That the elegance of this man and his history, I'm always excited when we can find relatives that make us proud.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's one that really does. But not only that, is that many of us in this room, we are the catalyst to serve the future generations for those who came before us. They select one of us to tell the story. And so Don probably was like, well, let me just go over to see if Leontyne can do something with my story, because my kids over here, they don't seem to know.
Right.
But we all know that there's probably a reason, and I had said to my husband, I think perhaps the reason, this is purely conjecture, I don't know, is that he had a second wife. And he divorced Thelma.
Okay.
So maybe they didn't get, when I spoke earlier about coming together at that Thanksgiving table and talking and sharing those stories, that may not have happened at their tables.
Right.
Because they ended up moving from New York City, and then Gladys, his second wife, she got the royalties. She got all the money. So the first wife didn't get the money. She did all the work, but she didn't get the money. And Gladys stayed until she died. She got money all the time, and they didn't have children. So there could have been some ambivalence there. We all have a story to tell, and I'm thinking that might be perhaps the reason that Don wasn't there. And his daughters moved from New York City to Buffalo, New York. So he was in New York City, and they were away. So but without me, like the one sister, Curtis's aunt, I've reached out to her to talk to me, and she won't talk to me. So there's something that they don't want me to know, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So I just go with what I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. You've been a great audience. Now, whenever you hear Betty Boop, hey, what are you gonna do? You gonna shake your what? You gonna shake your African.
Now, before I started, and this isn't part of the presentation, but before I do West Virginia research also, a couple of counties from hers, I had never heard of Stower College until I started researching up there. And then to find out you know, that her ancestor went there, and it's where my ancestors were at, and there was ancestors, relatives that went the same time he was there, you know, so it's
Pretty
interesting
incredible.
how small our world really
It
are,
is.
you know.
Oh, and then at Storer College, when I went in, remember the plaque on the back?
I
There
know.
was the Goins family, and of course Shelley's Goins family,
Our
that was
front
right
door.
under the Redmans.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've spotted just about all the houses around
Uh-huh.
where they were living, because all of them are still standing.
So we're all interconnected.
Very interesting.
I hope that you enjoyed the presentation.
Very much.
Thank you.
But it's nice to have a story.